How to create a legal register. So one of the requirements when running a business, and also exemplified through certain standards such as ISO 27001, PCI DSS, GDPR, is the requirement to understand the legal landscape in which you operate and the impact that that legislation has on you and your organization. It may be how it affects your operation. It may be how it affects your information security management system. So to create a legal register, your source of truth within the UK, or a good source of truth, is legislation.gov.uk that sets out all of the legislation of the land. You can browse by new legislation or old legislation. You can do things like searching on data, which returns things like the Data Protection Act, data retention, etc. You could try privacy, etc. So privacy is going to bring back things like the privacy in electronic communications regulations and the various amendments. So you can start to see that there is a source of information out there for you. Of course, you could always go to your legal counsel and get them to do this for you as well. And if you do this yourself first, be sure to get your legal counsel to sign it off. So let's create our basic standard legal register and touch upon how it can be used. So again, we're in trusty spreadsheets, trusty Excel for me. Other tools are available, other technologies are available. The first thing I want to know is the legislation. As with everything, I'm going to spell check all of this at the end, so if you want to pick me up on that and troll me, that's fine. We can spell check it at the end. So the legislation is the name of the legislation as it applies to you. We've got the name of our legislation either from our legal counsel, from knowledge, from local websites. It's going to be the legislation that applies to you within the jurisdictions that you operate. So that's worth bearing in mind. The legislation where your clients and your customers are is probably going to be appropriate as well. It's important, I guess, to have a what is it column. So just a high-level description of what the legislation is. Why is it important to us? So an overview of why that might be important to us. So for example, it's just the law and it is important, or it's a law that we're interested in, or it's a law that may become apparent to us further down the line. The next column is an applicable column. So what I want here is I want a yes/no column where at some point somebody is going to review this list of legislation and they're going to highlight whether or not that legislation is applicable to us as an organisation with a yes or a no. There is an argument that says that you would only ever include legislation in the list that is applicable. I like to include all the legislation that could be applicable and then highlight in a yes/no format, because it demonstrates that I have put some thought to it. It demonstrates that I have considered the other legislation, but I have also considered it not applicable to my organisation. And it is on my radar when I come to do my review, which is probably going to be annually, or at least periodically. So I've got my legislation, I've got what it is, I've got why it's important, I've got whether or not it's applicable, yes or no. I've got the date of the last review. So when did somebody last review this legislation and its applicability? And I've got the date of my next review. So that's nice, simple, straightforward. In essence, that is it. That is your legal register. You can tidy that up a little bit, as we always do. We can highlight and move out the columns a little bit, etc. So the hard work's going to come twofold. One is going to be populating that with legislation that's appropriate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you within here the kind of legislation that I deal with and that normally comes up. So what I do when I provide this is I provide a version of this with hyperlinks to the actual legislation, so it allows that direct link and an understanding and reading. I'm not doing that here. That's not the purpose of that. That's a little bit above and beyond. But it shows you and starts to demonstrate for you the kind of legislation that you're going to be considering. So you either go to the website, download it, go to your legal counsel and get copies of it. So you're going to see there's a lot in here and actual things that you may or may not consider to be relevant to what would be an information security management system, but are important when running a business or a limited company. So you would have your entire list, you go through, you populate that, you put what is it, why it is important, applicable, the last review and the next review date. As with all of this, you can then make that nice and big. We can then do some nice formatting on that, so we can print area, we can set the print area, we can file page setup just to make that look nice and pretty. We're going to fit that to one page. So what does that look like when we start to print that out? That looks, in fact, we'll open that in preview, which we haven't done in previous videos, just so that you can see what that looks like. So that you're going to start to see that populated. Other things that you can do, we've discussed before, you might want to put in there a cover sheet. So a cover sheet would have things like the title, it would have the author of the document, it would have the version control information. I'm not going to go through what is in version control, but also for this one in particular, let's zoom in a little bit if we can. For this one, we're going to want to capture our legal counsel's details. Now, this is a useful one if you want to capture the legal counsel that reviewed the document and when they reviewed it, who reviewed. So again, this shows and demonstrates that whilst internally you may have been through the process of reviewing applicable legislation, at least you've had some external counsel do that. Again, above and beyond, some bells and whistles upon that. I'm not going to format that and show you that, but that's something that you could add in. So that is how you create, use and review a legal register. Thank you.